Thank you very much. I'm so happy to attend this conference today, to attend this seminar by the Moscow School. I've been always very keen to take part, and Lena Nemirovsky invited me so many times to attend these seminars, but I only sent our regards with my delegates that would come back absolutely elated about what the Moscow School do in Golitsino, and that came several years in a row. But later I had this episode that Lena Nemirovska referred to while I was in jail behind the bars. I really felt the support of this network of the schools, and I would like to thank Lena and all the directors who, what they did in Strasbourg in their respective countries, would like to draw public attention. And that was really important to mobilize some European institutions, which in point of fact were the ones who were supposed to put an end to it immediately. So I really feel that I heard the voice of Lena Nemirovska even when I was in prison. I received telephone calls, and I have video conferences where school directors would speak up with the words of solidarity, so we were always in touch. I would like to, in my opening remarks, in my opening presentation, not to speak so much about my personal jail experience, but rather to see how we were conquering in the European Court and how we ensured the rule of law. Not really. I'm still waiting to be really acquitted, but the Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe took the decision that I and several other people should be fully acquitted by the Supreme Court of Azerbaijan. May I share with you how this works? I mean, from the legal perspective, how this is achieved in legal practice. Because if you look at it broadly, the democratic movement and the civic movement in the post-Soviet countries, in the post-Soviet space, is something that we have very few. We have very few success stories. So many appraisals, so many reasons to be unhappy, and they're replicated and echoed, but very few success stories. Someone would probably beg to differ with me, but also wanted that Russia is also, with Navalny movement, that this worked in many ways to create the first success story about the well-thought of, really quite considerate attitude to what has to be done at election. I'm really not really here in line with what Khodorkovsky said, who really condemned the smart voting initiative put forward by Alexei Navalny. I suppose we need success stories, and we were lucky to have it when we went to the European Court. We achieved an unprecedented ruling by the court. For the first time, Article 46 was invoked, Part 4 of the European Convention on Human Rights. What is that about? We should probably start with 2013, where I was arrested. In February 2013, I was arrested and accused of organizing public riot in one of small towns in Azerbaijan, somewhere in remote areas. When somebody is arrested, he first has to, there are some procedures that need to be performed. Surely we have lawyers in this audience, so I apologize to them for sharing these commonplace things, but since our audience is mixed and not necessarily everyone present here is a lawyer, but these procedures have to be fully performed and complied to. There is Article 5 of this convention, European Convention of Human Rights, that says that no one can be, without any suspicion or any reasonable reasons, arrested or apprehended if the court rules that somebody gives a warrant for arrest. The prosecutor's office has to produce some kind of, it's not really preliminary evidence, but maybe some witness accounts or some indirect maybe, but reasonable documents or attestations that say that maybe this person, as they say, has committed a crime. And they have to also to support their words. So if this person is left free, this may negatively influence the investigation. That is Article 5. When I was arrested, this article was completely disregarded. What the court had, it just had this prosecutors appealed that I need to be arrested, and this arrest was continued and extended for another 2 or 3 months until I had the court hearing. There is another article that can be invoked. At the same time, the prosecutor's office and the Ministry of the Interior came up with a statement, accusing me of commuting a statement. So, benefit of the doubt, Article 6. I'm referring to them because it is based upon these that we won the European Court. And most importantly, Article 18. What it's all about. If you are arrested, if you're no longer free, then you can only be arrested for things that are worded in your accusation. No other intentions or whatever. The government should not have it when somebody is arrested. We could prove in the court, in the European Court, that when I was arrested, in point of fact, procedures were disregarded, not because they were unaware of it. No, because they had this kind thought to jail Ilgar 8 months before presidential election. So it happened 8 months, and I announced that I will run for presidency as a candidate. We proved that in the European Court back in May 2014. So it is, and we won in the European Court. That was the 5th case all in all. Actually, in this, since this convention was approved, in many decades where they really said that Article 18 was violated. Tymoshenko, Lutsenko were Ukrainian comrades who were Gusinsky, as I suppose he was the first, and someone from Moldova. That is all about Moldova. That was case number 5. In all other cases, these people and their rights were soon secured, although they were previously violated, as was found by the European Court. In my way, the government stood firm in its position. It showed this kind of insistent deny. It would deny insistently that they should really refuse to do what the European Court ruled, because in March 14 they gave me a 7-year sentence. So one thing is when you are arrested, and the other thing is when you are sentenced. They were saying that you are arrested, this is what the government, yes, they have confirmed, we understand, but it has to do to arrest alone and and detention before court hearing, which is nonsense. And I must show to you how the European courts work in their sense. The decision of the European courts are declarative. It's not really our courts, really, like, it doesn't work the way our courts work. When they rule, this decision comes into effect immediately. Whereas European Court has declarative decision, where they declare some rights have been violated. And then the Committee of Ministers, made up of 47 representatives, rather ambassadors sitting in Strasbourg, they vote and have an open discussion where they decide upon the measures that need to be taken by the government to make sure that this declarative ruling of the court should come into effect. This is not a court in the way we usually perceive. And Azerbaijan refused to honor this ruling of it refused to take it. Then what followed was a 3-year-long war, or would put it this way, or procrastination, as the word is in English. Yes, indeed. Procrastination, or there's endless hearings because if you do not honor, the country should be punished. But who can punish Azerbaijan? Well, you recently saw how very serious problems that were caused by this exclusion. It's not really exclusion when Russia was denied the right to vote in Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. So if this commitment is there, and it is laid down in Article 46 of European conditions, so this 3-year red tape or foot dragging ended in the Council of Ministers that we tried to put the pressure on, and I too, because I wrote very angry letters to them that I thought they were lacking moral principles. Then there was this really quite a lot of public pressure put by the schools whom I wish to support, I don't know, from California to Vladivostok. In this space, there were public actions, activism, petitions were sent, European parliamentary race would also come on board. Azerbaijan refused to honor. So the Committee of Ministers in December 2017, finally, at last, decided they would go to court against Azerbaijan for not honoring the ruling, their decision. So it says that if the country refuses to honor, to execute, then the Committee of Ministry has to take the vote by 2/3 majority, may send the case back to be reviewed by the big chamber of the European Court. That would really decide whether there were violations or not. That was truly unprecedented. For the first time, Article 46 was never invoked. So a very difficult situation in Azerbaijan emerged, where at the top level, where the president of France, that really used to serve as an ambassador, he really appealed to the president of Azerbaijan, saying it cannot go any longer, you cannot disregard the Grand Chamber ruling, and it has to be now the 2 presidents. I suppose 2 more presidents, more than 2 would be involved. So in August 2018, I was set free. First, it was on but in May, where are we now? Yes, we are on the 29th of September. But it was not really 6 months ago. It was 29th of May. Because where the Grand Chamber took the ruling, because I was first released on probation, which said that indeed Azerbaijan is violating indeed the European Convention of Human Rights. It was not done at the level of the Council of Ministers, no. It was now, when the case was returned to the Grand Chamber, they were really taking this. It was unprecedented, and it was we can hardly expect that it would be done again, because it is very difficult to achieve 2/3 vote. I can give you an example, but I cannot confirm. I know some sources that countries voted against in the Council of Ministers, against referring the case to the Grand Chamber. I know these countries. Russia? No, that was not. 8 countries. Azerbaijan and Turkey voted in contra. The others abstained, which is tantamount to countering. Russia, Georgia, Ukraine, Moldova, Serbia, and some other Western European country, but I'm not sure if it did, so I don't want to make these claims. So the sources are reliable because these sittings are behind the closed doors. So there's some leaks. So all our former Soviet countries plus Turkey and Serbia, so they voted in contra, although actually he claimed it is abstained. But I have to, since I'm in the Moscow school, I must say that the Russian judge, Dmitry Dzedov, back in 2014 and in 2019, he was, because this decision is taken unanimously, he voted with those who took these unanimous. Sorry, I'm behind over my time, so we'll stop at that with my presentation. But there are many aspects of this case. You understand why I think it matters for this audience, at least because the names of very many politicians in Russia today, they still have court cases pending. They're referring and citing. They're citing very actively my case in the European Court. There's court ruling on Navalny. On others, they very actively and often refer to this case, and it now serves as a precedent. And I suppose it's very good for civic activism and others. Thank you so much, Ilgar. As I was listening to Ilgar, we're trying to put on somebody else's shoes. What would happen to me after 5.5 years in jail in Azerbaijan or Russia? But you see what he looks like. And look at how strong is his spirit. Well, thank you, Elgar. It's really a pleasure. Elgar is here with us. You can talk to him privately. So please feel free to find the time and please approach our speaker, especially that I would like to give the floor to the next speaker. I don't know. I'm very nervous when I speak about this person. This is a longtime friend of this school. This is director of Yerevan School of Political Studies, a person with a remarkably, Armen Zakharyan. Because Zakharyan sounds very much like Zakharov, so they're like my cousin. So Yerevan School is a very lively institution. It's a very good institution. I was very happy when Armen invited me to attend, and I spoke there as an expert for a couple of times. What Armen does, trust me please, it's something that is very noted in Armenia. May I just share with you one piece before I give the floor to the speaker? For the first time when I was invited by Armen several years ago, I'm not really very fluent in Armenian, but they told me that the seminar would be attended by the prime minister of the country. And I asked my brother, how do you make it happen? He says, we are so much respected in this country. We are a small country, you know. Everybody knows one another, and they really highly value us. And the prime minister loves coming to attend our sessions. He's keen on that. I really witnessed that, indeed. There's no simultaneous translation because they're all present here. There's only one person who didn't speak Armenian. Armen gave me with a very polite interpreter, and the Prime Minister spent 4 hours with the Armenian school, mind you. He answered all the questions that were raised by the audience. He was so open. I was shocked. It came as a shock to me. This is fantastic experience that what schools can do and what clout they may have in the country. Dear friend, please, dear brother, and I'll give you the floor. Thank you very much. Well, distinguished Elena Mikhailовna, much respected Yuri Petrovich, my dear colleagues, dear experts, dear participants. Well, I would like to cordially welcome you here. The very fact that we are present here today just again supports this view that whatever happens in this world, it all starts with ideas and thoughts. And what was very far away, or maybe not so far away, in 1990s, he and she and he, I don't know, say they, she and he, Elena Mikhailova and Yuri Petrovich as personalities, thought they would start the School of Political Studies so that people could exchange ideas, come to get to know oneself in the opening world, meet one another, so that they would have idea about universal space where everyone can find one's own meaning. A stone, when it's thrown into the water, makes waves. Ideas work in the same way if they are valuable and they come from the depth. And it's reasonable. And the ideas of the school spread. This is what is being said in this very wide situation. It happened this way because that was not just making school happen, it was creating this school. And this practice that then spread not only in post-Soviet space, it's now present in Transcaucasus and the Balkans, in Central Europe, and it also crossed the Mediterranean, and it is now present in Africa. We have schools in Tunisia, Morocco, and this initiative may take over elsewhere. Today, the number of schools of political studies are 22 in this family. And the very fact that we're present here in Jurmala and tomorrow will be in Strasbourg, or we may meet in Berlin or elsewhere, this is all thanks to the idea that was born in Moscow. What I can prove here, what she said, Yelena Mikhailovna, what she said, that the structure and this situation that emerged in Armenia, what was the influence of the Moscow school upon that? This is what I have to tell you. We have 400 graduates of Armenian school. One of them is present here. 30 out of them, in some way or another, after the revolution that Armenia saw last year, are now taking some positions in government. 10 of our graduates are now members of the parliament after the revolution. This is all thanks to just Moscow set up their school, and this initiative spread. Yerevan started its own school, but these people would meet one another in the school. Armenia, and Andrei Alexandrovich just said that Armenia is a small country. But many of our graduates would come up to our school, would talk to one another, would meet, know our friends, and if one of them went into government, I don't know, he is now, for example, in charge of the immigration department, he took up 2 more, they would recommend one another. It's some kind of network. So this is how things stand. As they meet in their school, and they would take on, recommend one another.
7 of these schools of political studies and civil education act in the post-Soviet countries, and I will say just a few words about the Armenian experience in the post-Soviet years. You may have heard about the developments in the political situation in Armenia last year. Some call it a Velvet Revolution, which was certainly a consequence of the general emotion of the society and its wish to change the political situation in the country. I believe it has been for the first time after the USSR, the Soviet Union, is that the huge wealth was up for plundering, because the large wealth across 1/6 of the globe was literally in the focus of the so-called privatization, and indeed led to the great discontent among peoples, which in part may have been the consequence of the presidential form of government, which has been adopted in most of the post-Soviet states, whereas the great contrast in the income and influence led to this distortion of political situation, whereby oligarchs were, in a matter of 10 years, possessing 80% of the national wealth. Clearly, the so-called imitation democracy also played a part, and I'm saying, and I'm calling this imitation democracy because in form, elections were taking place either as elections of the president or the parliament, and there were international monitoring organizations which were de jure calling them democratic elections, but which were de facto based on hereditary precepts or hereditary law, although unwritten. So this oligarchy, while it was declared that this is a liberal democratic system, however, this political system was not open to access by the public, but has been indeed a part of the privileged few. And indeed, each round of elections was accompanied by the popular dissatisfaction, and indeed Armenia faced this situation whereby 10% of the population emigrated from the country. The Armenian state debt was almost 3 times as high as the GDP, which meant that the state debt was indeed rested on the shoulders of the future generations of the Armenians. Finally, according to the so-called happiness index, Armenia was in the last lines according to this rating. Now, this is not quite an objective, of course, rating, and I could say in Egypt you could see that people live worse or in greater poverty than in Armenia. However, they would have a higher appreciation of their lives. However, what is the problem here? The problem is about higher education. Armenian society has more or less a high university or college education, and people were dissatisfied with the way they lived. Anyway, jokes put aside, this became a locomotive of change. In a matter of several years, the college graduates from Armenia who have graduated from the top universities in the world and have indeed brought a lot of experience to them. The young people generally have and continue to be getting good education. However, the oligarchy was in stark contrast to this overall situation, and this erosion of legality became one of the greatest problems in the republic. Throughout several years, at the level of the speakers of the parliament, the so-called pro-governmental faction in the government kept maintaining that they have to cross the Melik Adamian Street and join the ruling party. So it was indeed an attempt to build a single party, which was quite in line with the Soviet, pretty much communist approach. Most public activists and those young people who got their education abroad were curbed and did not have much place in the Armenian society. This was the situation that we were facing as late as 2 years ago. The young people started to the streets. rallies paralyzed the country. Mr. Nikol Pashinyan, the leader of this movement, showed that he is open-handed. So everybody was going to these streets, showing that they have that their hands are empty. They don't carry rocks, they don't carry guns, they do not carry Molotov cocktails, and indeed everything was done to preclude and to rule out bloodshed. On the first day when I saw on the streets of Yerevan when the military joined the protesters, I told my colleagues either the government would shoot the people or the government would step down. And I have photographs on the flash card from this revolution of last year. The government decided to step down, and for almost 18 months, we are seeing in Armenia situation of political political turmoil in a way, which, of course, is the consequence that the situation that was present in Armenia was no longer untenable. However, the future is not quite clearly defined. There's a lot of uncertainty. There is no post-Soviet mentality in Armenia. That is certainly to be said. On the other hand, there is also this everyday interest as to what is happening in other post-Soviet republics. Of course, we are keenly interested in what is happening in Russia, in the Ukraine, in Georgia, in Belarus. What weapons is Belarus selling to Azerbaijan, or what is happening? But the general sense that we follow single path of development is, in this sense, making Armenia, of course, a part of this single space. The national identity has been compounded with the political dimension or the political identity as a factor of subjectivity. And today, when Armenia has faced the choice of entering the Eurasian customs union, this decision was not an easy one to take, not only because of the economic reasons, but because of the matters of security, which is a concern, of course, which is still faced by Armenia. However, we have to take into consideration that the post-Soviet states have political and economic interests which allow nations to seek for solutions which would be of interest to all, from energy policies through to the interface in defense area and humanitarian cooperation. But the question that certainly is in the agenda today is machines, cars. When Armenia became a member of the Eurasian Union, because Armenia had 12,000 entrepreneurs which were registered as car dealers, there is not much industry left in Armenia. So these car dealers were allowed to continue for another 5 years. And in this sense, Armenia was different from Russia, Belarus, Kyrgyzstan, and Kazakhstan. And now we're seeing that cars are about $4,000 to $5,000 less than in other post-Soviet countries. So from Kazakhstan, from from the North Caucasus. There are many people coming to Yerevan to buy automobiles because they do it because this way they are overcoming the customs tariffs which exist in other member states of this Eurasian Union. And when I'm asking, are you selling them bad cars? But in fact, because these cars have to move to Kazan from Yerevan. So if it's a bad car, so this is what we're seeing in the post-Soviet states. So what we're seeing in this Eurasian Union is wheeler-dealer mentality. But the important thing that what I would like to stop at, in a matter of 15 to 20 years, we will see that the elites who were born and raised in the Soviet Union will start to go away. These elites, which still had a single approach to many things, because they were coming from the single society, which was at that time the Soviet society. And I could already sense it about 25 years ago when I was I was a student at that time. And what is your favorite film? My teacher would ask, and I was saying a Mimino film. That's by a Georgian film director. What is Mimino? This UN English teacher was asking. She's never heard about it. And then I understood that we, people who are in this hall, people from one country, we still had a cultural code. We are in one and the same cultural space. We still have or had a common language now, but we have to realize that this time will go away. As the time goes on and the political elites of old are gone, we shall see generations which may go away. My generation of Armenians still speaks Russian better than any other foreign language. The generation of my sons speak better English and French than Russian. And indeed, we are seeing this great evolution. For good or for bad, it is really not a matter of discussion. We are seeing some evident social change, which we all have to be prepared for, creating a basis for a new democratic civil society is great important. Throughout these years, we have tried to find these solutions within our school. And we have continued to practice and continued to discuss democracy with our colleagues from Bulgaria, Romania, the Balkans. But it is clear that we speak with greater ease with those with whom we have some cultural closeness. And in this sense, I think that it is a capital which should be used for the benefit of our nations, to use those things which still unite us. And I do hope that the cultural space will continue to exist. Thank you. Some of you may ask, why am I not following the standing order? Why am I not following the agenda and the 10-minute limit. However, I really want our esteemed colleagues to speak out. I have to confess that I do not know much about the Belarusian school. We have met, I met Mr. Alexander Dobrovolsky only yesterday, and I have an intuition is that they have to go through dire straits. And I know that Belarus is not an easy place for civic champion of civics, but I'm happy that Alexander Dobrovolsky is with us. Every year we have seminar participants from Belarus. And being a citizen of modern Belarus is not easy. Not unlike Russia, for that matter. Alexander, thank you. Thank you very much indeed. I think that the Moscow school is even in greater difficulty than we. I'm very thankful to Lena and Yura and the team for inviting me. I have a presentation, for about a year we have spoken and considered this very topic, the post-Soviet space, distant, different, and shared. And I'm thankful to Armen Zakarian already touching upon this concept of cultural codes, which may have united us or continue to unite us to some extent. My presentation is called Situation in the Post-Soviet Space, and I would like to say a few words about the possible development scenarios. So we're seeing here several groups of countries, and Russia is interestingly also viewed as a conglomerate of different unities. There are the Baltic states, the Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, those states which have indeed fallen out, one may say, from this post-Soviet space. Belarus, the Ukraine, and Moldova, very different states, very different processes. The Caucasus, Transcaucasia, as it has also been known, and Central Asia, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and Kazakhstan as a very influential actor. So this is how we see this space, geographical space today. What was our methodology? We tried to make some forecasts, which is, of course, a very ungrateful task. However, we tried to range the subjects and the actors which are influential in the context of the contemporary political situation. And here we had to take into account not only internal but also external factors. Then we tried to reconstruct the tendencies which influence the situation, but the declared goals were often different from the realistic, the officially declared goals. Then we were trying to identify the tendencies which influenced the situation, which was not an easy task. Here we were conducting focus groups, talking to the different members, of the political establishment, and then we built a matrix of scenarios, which I will show a bit later, and we were also trying to identify the most probable scenarios. In this sense, scenario probabilistics is not an attempt to foresee the future, but rather to adapt the strategies which are being developed to the different scenarios. So these are the most influential subjects that we have introduced into this matrix. Russia, China, the EU, the United States, the Ukraine, and Kazakhstan. There were other subjects, of course, including social organizations, churches. However, these were acknowledged to be the most influential actors. Now, Russia, being the most influential actor, we have reconstructed these goals. Number one, a claim to reconstituting the global influence. Preserving the zone of influence and preserving the empire. So these are the three implicit goals for Russia that we have identified. China, obtaining the status of a global leader, the expansion in Asia, so far in Asia, and the reconstituting of the so-called Silk Road. Our horizon of prognostication was 10 years. The EU, security, cooperation, energy supply, influence and Eastern Partnership, and support for democratizing in the post-Soviet space. Now, and we have ranged these goals by what we perceive to be the hierarchy of importance. So, according to this scenario, the United States, in our views, the United States have pursued the goals of re-establishing the world order, something that was and would be consistent with the post-war stability, and indeed the United States is very concerned about the security and a promotion of democratic values. The Ukraine, independence, the reconstituting of the territorial integrity, European choice and security. Kazakhstan, strengthening of independence, security, and economic cooperation, which, in our view, is related to the key role of Kazakhstan in this new Silk Road. The tendencies which we have identified in this region, globally important, are the new digital technologies, which is, of course, a somewhat vague term, but we have seen that the forecasts for technologies developments are such that the mankind may fail to control them. And in this sense, we are viewing the concept of the technological singularity, which may change a lot in the world today. The new energy sector as part of new technologies, but also something that may influence our demands for the energy supply, and new management technologies. These are the regional tendencies. Disintegration of the Soviet space, post-Soviet space, which relates not only to Russia, but also all of the ex-Soviet republics. There is an integration tendency, however, it is a lot weaker. Crisis of raw materials economy, extraction-based economy, brain leak or intellect leak from post-Soviet states. And we have been looking for some bifurcation points. The bifurcation points which originated from the catastrophe theory, which shows that the events could develop in one or another way after a zone of after a point of no return. So we have seen different bifurcation points, but we have been able to identify two. Number one, would the crisis of extraction-based economy or raw materials-based economy enter an acute phase where the oil prices may go down and the resource rich countries would find themselves in crisis, or that would not happen? This is one point of bifurcation. And the other is if the Ukraine would leave the zone of influence of Russia. And that's an extremely important point for the entire post-Soviet space. So we have built a matrix of scenarios, uncertainty, and this is what we have done. One, uncertainty, if the Ukraine would leave the zone of influence of Russia, would it stand its ambition? And secondly, is the crisis of raw-based economy. Should we see and shall we see the crisis of raw materials-based economy? So we have seen three scenarios to emerge from this matrix. Number one is a breakthrough when the Ukraine is successful, but the raw materials economy would continue to exist. So Russia would not suffer much because of an economic crisis. And of course, Belarus is also among those countries which are resource-based because it is primarily a re-exporter of the Russian energy. The second scenario is whereby Georgia, Moldova, and some of the post-Soviet countries make a European choice. The other scenario is what we call the post-Soviet Renaissance, whereby the Ukraine remains in the zone of influence of Russia. We have developed these scenarios, and I would be happy to explain these in private conversations throughout these seminars, as well as to share our presentations. The only thing I would like to mention, however, is that the post-Soviet Renaissance is only possible if the new Ukrainian government is not successful and becomes politically bankrupt.
Where the current government will fail and where pro-Russian parties led by Medvedchuk will come to rule, and again Russia must in this situation even have enough resources to keep Ukraine in its orbit. Otherwise the other two scenarios are highly more likely, and the new Europe is that Ukraine will be like the trailblazer, the example of good, a successful fight against corruption and democratization, and a new Europe will become a very strong attractor for countries like Belarus, because Belarus and Asia, well, it's hard to understand for us. In point of fact, we sometimes find it very good for us to stay within the Eurasian Economic Union when we buy cheap energy, but tax maneuver may exempt us from, may push us away from this attractive perspective. So the last point I wish to make is that there are things that exist objectively. There is nothing you can do without it. If you look at the markets, markets are measured by GDP, well, roughly, at nominal, not at purchasing power, at nominal value. So do let us look at what are the poles of influence for countries like Moldova, Ukraine, Belarus, and what markets are there. They may have higher barriers, but they have quite high awards after you go through this barrier. And Eurasian economic space, and Russia has the GDP that is commensurate actually, and there is no way you can do without it. So once again, graphic representation. So speaking about strategic choice, sooner or later these markets will be so attractive that you can't disregard it. At this, I would like to stop my presentation. If you have questions, I've got many slides. I made an announcement where I said Alexander would say something about his school. But this is what our school have been doing. But what you call at the sidelines of our summit, you can find out whatever was left. So thank you so much. So we go on, and I'd like to start with, again, making a declaration of love for yet another school. The thing is that the second school in this glorious panel became Tbilisi School of Political Studies, founded after Moscow School in some years after that. And this is an institution that I am very much respect, value in every way. Because as I work with this school, I also had the privilege to meet them, the way they work, very closely. Because several times I was invited to speak there as an expert. So from my point of view, Tbilisi School may be something we could admire for a number of reasons. Firstly, what I can tell you, Lasha, please correct me if I make a mistake, that school is the school where the people are competing to get there. Many people want to be students in this school. If I remember correctly, this is something like over 50 per each seat. So the school gained such a reputation in its own country that a vast number of people are keen to go to this school, want to go through this institution. You should see the way this school opens. It looks very much like a diplomatic corps that goes to Karmas, has usually all the ambassadors of the notable countries that attend these meetings, and they speak before the school. They take these invitations with great happiness and are very happy to do it. And this certainly is something pretty special of that institution. What else is special is that the Tbilisi School, Lasha, I will not share all the secrets, of course, I will leave something for you. At Tbilisi School, yes, another very peculiar feature. They've got cultural component, which they develop and promote in every way they can, with all painstaking effort. They sing, not only do they sing. After classes, they watch films. They're usually films that have to do with Georgian culture and historic path. Those films are then discussed, and they're discussed in the presence of the makers. It is the actors or directors who directed those films come to speak about this. Once, when I, as an expert, when they met me at the airport, and instead of taking me to the seminar, we went to the Philharmonic. We picked up the tenor who was supposed to take part in the seminar with his remarkable voice. After the meeting, that was followed by the concert. They had a seminar that was looked at harp players, 4 ladies playing harps. That was something absolutely, well, speaking about polyphony, Georgian polyphony, that is often accompanies the fora of the school in Tbilisi, with these beautiful concerts. Well, I stop in admiration. and of course the order that rules in the seminars. It doesn't look at what I always urge you to be disciplined. Can you imagine the regime in Armas before the start of the seminar? 5 minutes before the session, everyone is present. You can't shout from the floor because beautiful music is playing. Everyone is listening, trying to set the tune for the. You cannot be late. This is, I don't know what sort of reprisals would follow before the people. So this soft Georgian spirit, in some way, it has shown itself. And of course, the level of expertise. This is what I should have started with. The level of expertise is very high, and the school certainly has the reputation. I never saw prime ministers of Georgia addressing the school, that's true, but very responsible political personalities attend the meetings of each of these fora. Lasha, I apologize. This is just because my deep feelings. I can calm down because I'm so fond of the Tbilisi school. I very much appreciated that Lasha Giladze, a great friend of mine, is here with us. And Tbilisi school is that he represents. This is a unique guest because he graduated from two schools. Lasha was graduate of Tbilisi school and also graduated from Moscow School of Political Studies. These twice. So, like people, like children who do poorly at school have to stay to repeat the academic year. So that is the joke that he did like academic years in both schools. Well, thank you very much, Andrei. Thank you, dear friends. After such words of introduction, I really find it very hard to speak before this audience. Dear colleagues, let me please tell you about Tbilisi School, because Andrei presented us in such a way that I find it hard to add something to what was said. And not about Moscow School, which has been with me for 13 years. And in these 13 years, it has become an inalienable part of myself. There is this theory that each person has his or her own paradise. And I hope this theory is true, and in 100 years I will get to Golitsino when I die, as my personal paradise. So let me please share with you the problems and the challenges and the trends that our school and my school has been facing, and that we see present in my country, and that I find it easy to discuss here, because I'm here like a participant of all this and a stakeholder in these processes, and also I'm an observer who's looking at it from very close. Since the times that the Soviet Union collapsed and Georgia gained independence, it was clearly defined that Georgia would pursue two goals. Firstly, that was integration into European structures, amongst others, integration to North European structures. That was the reason for that, in principle, there were two reasons for this, quite serious reasons. First of all, the path that was declared through the democratization of the country, and most importantly, the concept of security. And as we see, the concept of security, as we see it, if we integrate into the European structures, not into economic and historic, but also structures such as NATO. And this is not an irreversible course that we embarked on, and we laid it down in our constitution. And we're moving there. On the other hand, Europe, the EU, European structures, are also interested in the processes of democratization in the territories that border on non-European countries. So this theory of the so-called democratic world and democratic peace, where the principle of it is that democracies, if they function without any caveats, they will not go to war with one another. and they will not be posing a threat to one another. And in this sense, the European structures and basically today's West strongly promotes democratization in Georgia. Amongst other things, another thing to support it is the Act of 2014, which made it a law that Georgia should enjoy free trade regime with the EU, as well as before 2017, the act that was adopted then that gives basically visa-free travel to the EU. So what is it? Why didn't we move forward even further when we follow that path? May I please, in very concise manner, to share with you the challenges and the problems that the country faces. The problems could be grouped in several blocks, if you will. Political, let me please start with the political agenda. Many figures of authority and international organizations often declare that the degree of democratization in Georgia is similar to what we call managed democracy or hybrid democracy, which is not per se a liberal democracy. The thing is that, and behind the facade of democracy, I'm just quoting what they say, and behind the facade of democracy, what is hidden is a system of electoral authoritarianism, when the ruling party, the government in place, does whatever it can to grab all power after the election. On the one hand, this is absolutely the case. It's natural. Every party in government wants to grab it all. But the very fact that the country doesn't have the institutions that would stand in the way, just purely, of course, at the institution level, and this institution should be strong and resilient. In absence of such institutions, this becomes a major problem. Another major problem is the development of political individualism within the party. It doesn't have to do with the ruling party alone. One can say that any political party in Georgia is very much like many others. They're like twin brothers in what they do, but they all governed following Lenin's principle of democratic centralism, as put forward by the Communist Party. There is not talk of democracy within the party, which leads to, for example, Prime Minister's post would be taken by people who do not represent the ruling party. No, they have no party affiliation whatsoever. After they leave, after they may resign or may not resign, but this in some way is a major problem. It is a major problem in our developing political entities, in our proper development towards true democracy. I'm afraid I might make a mistake, but political parties, how many do we have? Is it 200 or over 200? Most of them, it's clear that are made up of one member or several party members who are very proudly calling themselves, we are leaders of political party such and such. And they always go to run for some posts. I remember 5 or 6 dinosaurs, political dinosaurs, who in their 30 years have been running for whatever post that goes for grabs. They just have like the purpose of 5 at best. So they are unable to develop following the Russian pathway, and this is something that poses a problem for them, even for the political system. The most, I will put it this way, the nuances that I like. Many things are determining things in the new way. The most widespread system of political debate that Georgia has. We have this system in place. The Americans call it whataboutisms. This is a classical communist system, where, for example, Americans, all kinds of consultations or polemical disputes between the representatives of the Communist Party, they were very apt at that, but they would very happily accept the arguments that the Americans put, and they say, what about socialist problems in the United States? And this polemics would follow a very different path. When not so much the problems of the Soviet system, but instead they would swerve into discussing social problems, say, of Afro-Americans. And this is a very poor heritage that we see very much alive and kicking every day in Georgia. And what really stands in the way of democratization is exactly this. The parties realized that in order to gain further victories at further elections, what they need is effective programs in place, and they need that would pay off with some effect in short-term perspective. They don't focus correctly on the long-term reforms that really are important. For example, reforms in education system, reforms in healthcare and social well-being. This is being postponed further on and further on because it stands for and nobody will get any gain from there. But what we see instead are these political submarines, if you will. And what is important is the problems of economic nature. Well, you probably will be surprised. Georgia is not the richest country in post-Soviet space. Even in South Caucasus, it's not the richest country, and this is a major problem because, as many theories postpone, poor countries find it very hard to build democracy, a democratic system, and if it's even harder to keep it, preserve it from attacks from its attempts to go back to authoritarianism. This is a given. But unfortunately, the economic growth, yes, it is seen there, but if you looked, it's not that strong, so strong as it was, say, 10 or 5 years ago. And this creates a major challenge in Georgia as we move to the goals we try to attain. Third major problem or sphere of problems in Georgia is the public. The public who, in point of fact, reflect the problems and they live through these problems. And this is where we become hostages to the problems of little political education or poorly educated and insufficient communication with, say, the government does not really communicate with the public. Beginning with 1999, it was 4 times that we would change the people in government. Every time when someone would come to government, they would just vilify those that were in government before them because they stayed away from democracy, but exactly they commit the same mistakes as the prior government. Every new government would be swearing they would defend democracy, but in the long run, usually this cycle, it usually takes 2 electoral periods. In the long run, it very much would serve for authoritarianism. This led to situations where the public and somehow would look at it with certain skepticism. If you look at percentage at these figures, findings that you saw alongside these general protests by the previous governments, well, this percentage would go down. It goes down slowly but surely. I would say it is for the good because the public now are more or less. So let me put it say they're not that they're not really so easy to deceive. They take with a grain of salt what the political parties say, but in terms of political education for the public, This is something that we see very often, that it is something that predetermines the outcomes, and they are ahead of our political elites that we see. So much for the one side, but on the other hand, the public are not involved at all in development of their country. We don't have this feeling of inclusiveness. And this is something that again poses a major threat in this sense, challenge that when the public are not involved, they don't feel they are on board in developing political, economic sphere, they begin to feel that they don't live in a state, they live in a country. They begin to sense on the cultural level as what they inherit, like of these old values. And they've got this feeling that this is a state and they are individuals, they represent the public, they are citizens. But when people feel this way, this is more important, but is no longer important for the Georgians. They more feel that they are all compatriots, but not co-citizens. Well, with your permission, I will not discuss security problems. I will not discuss of the occupied territories. This really poses a major problem. I don't see the solution in the very near future, but the fact that one has to develop further, one has to work over, first and foremost, with the public. One has to work with positive dialogue with the community, with the public, but one has to criticize the government. One has to criticize, not in this matter, what about it? No, one should really invoke the arguments, and one should be creative. One should be really positive about doing these arguments. And I do hope I didn't go beyond the time that was allocated to me. The only thing I wish to say, my dear colleagues, is that one thing I wish to say at the end, that right now there are many people who are dependent on, addicted to some substances from political systems or whatever. As a physician, as a psychiatrist, who works as an addictologist, I know from my own example that the only positive addiction is dependency, addiction to thinking, addiction to development, and I am addicted to the school. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Lasha, for these kind words. Dear colleagues, I would like to maybe going somewhat ahead of what we were. I should have said it at the end. Please note the level of expertise, these communications that they make, is that, once again, may I repeat that this idea to organize a session like this, I suppose it's absolutely great. Lena speaks from the floor. Yes, the brilliant cohort, as Lena puts it. A couple of words about Georgian school, about Georgia, if you will. I've already gave you the reasons why I can never stop speaking about Georgia. I would like to introduce another participant from Georgia. This is, again, a close, dear friend of mine, Nodaria Dorasilya. Nodaria, please wave to our audience. This is our Georgian guest who graduated from Moscow School. Moscow School, and actually he, in this way, the culture that the Moscow School started shaping, it's something that sort of moved to Georgia, and we are very, very much happy and value it that Nodari is here with us, and we're so pleased to see these people with us. May I add another important thing? Nodari, as I told you, graduated from Moscow School, and his wife graduated from Tbilisi School. So, from my perspective, this is a combination that is ideal, as I said. So we carry on, and I would like to give the floor to the final speaker on the panel at this session. This is Georgy Chizhov. Georgy is also, as an expert, is a fantastic figure because Lena already said something about Georgy when she introduced our distinguished panelists here. Georgy chose this path that he moved to at a time which is very interesting to Ukraine. He moved to Kiev. As far as I understand, Georgy at that never lost his ties with Russia, unlike many others who moved to Kiev in those days, so he never abandons that. So this possibility to look at what goes on from within, and Georgy is an analyst, a very good analyst, if you will. This is a possibility that is unique. Georgy, we look forward to your presentation. You have the floor. Thank you for these words. Before, I should like to say something about Ukraine. I understand this is a topic that is always interesting, a very lively topic. I have to say what a pleasure it is for me to be in this room among this audience. After 2014, where we no longer go to Golitsyn, I was actually doubting whether we can keep it. Well, I never worried that the school would stay alive, but what was known as the Federal Glass in Golitsyn, this instrument, this tool where people come to this system and many stay forever in it. So as I'm watching you, I realize that despite all the difficulties, you did it. You did it. It's fantastic that it survived. Despite formally we are torn away from our roots, we never are, although even abroad, even certain exile, if you will, the school can carry on. And this is, of course, we have to thank the creators, the makers of the school and its team, and all those who go to this school as students, as alumni. Why am I sure that the school will stay alive and stable in any conditions? This co-participation in the Moscow School of Civic Enlightenment, it gives such pleasant feelings. There are few things in life you could compare with it. So anyone who has experienced it would go back to it again and again. As to events in Ukraine, well, attention is drawn by the changes, what you call, many experts have called an electoral revolution. Indeed, it worked in such a way that seemingly the peaceful legal change in government in 2019 turned out to be more complete, more full than what happened in 2014. We expected back in 2014 that as a result of revolution, they would go down with former practices, they would at last see the changing generations in political life. It never happened then. In 2014. This is happening now. Whether it is in-depth thing, this is an objective for us to understand and appreciate it. Why there's success?
Mr. Zelensky, Mr. President Zelensky today may look to many post-Soviet societies an exemplary case. And indeed, what has happened in the Ukraine for the past couple of decades have led to this electoral result. But indeed, a direct way to this electoral result were the expectations which turned out to be forlorn time and over again, when throughout two revolutions in Kiev twice in a decade, with the true revolutions, people expected the system to evolve, the society to change. However, the Ukrainian public did not see their expectations to be satisfied, and here on the example of the elections of last year is that the public said no to the old political establishment. And it is really difficult to overestimate the defeat of the old political elite during the last electoral cycle, because what we see in the Rada, in the Ukrainian parliament today, is that the political establishment of even a few years ago is almost gone. We see new faces, we see an entirely new class emerging. And what we can see, on the one hand, is an attempt to concentrate the power, to change the rules of the game to secure against the defeat in the future. And unfortunately, this is a malady which is, I would say, inherent in all post-Soviet states, except probably for the Baltic states, and we can see it in the Ukraine, even today. Yes, indeed, there was an outstanding victory during the presidentials, and also an interesting victory to the parliament, where the party of Mr. Zelensky, which was in the majority constituencies where the deputies of the Rada have kept their places, we would see a very interesting composition of the Ukrainian parliament. And in most constituencies, we could see that the servant of the people, the movement of Mr. Zelensky, have gotten their places in the parliament, while many of them were literally unknown to the public. And a classical example, when a wedding photographer in the constituency of Zaporozhye overtook the previous MP who was and had been heading the local huge machine building or aviation engine building enterprise. Mr. Boguslav was defeated. Even though he seemed to have had or almost made an agreement with the government. And even though Mr. Zelensky's party did not openly support Mr. Boguslav, however, he still lost. He lost the MP elections to a wedding photographer. So what we're seeing is that the new Rada, the new Ukrainian parliament, has been elected in advance, with the expectations, with the hope of things changing. But the overall intellectual level of the parliamentarians has drastically fallen. And I'm not talking about integrity, I'm not talking about the moral standing, I'm far away from talking about the dignity, but I'm talking about the intellectual level. What we're seeing is most of the MPs simply can't maintain a meaningful conversation with this journalist who is interviewing them. And it is interesting what is going to happen next. There is a sensation, there's an impression that the new government is trying to change things. For the first time, the impeachment law was adopted, and this is what Mr. Zelensky promised, but eventually this law is about the impossibility of the impeachment, because the procedures for impeachment, while we know that in 1999 when towards the end of Mr. Yeltsin's term, the impeachment was impossible because of the procedure was too sophisticated. Now, the Ukrainian procedure for this impeachment, which has recently been adopted by the Ukrainian parliament, is even more sophisticated than the Russian impeachment procedure. Now, yet another unpleasant impression that we have seen is the constitutional majority in the parliament. The Electoral Commission has only recently been formed. It is very well balanced, and during the big electoral campaigns of 2019, we have seen that there have been no major claims to the Electoral Commission. And while there were two decisions of the Electoral Commission, of the Central Electoral Commission, were declined by the courts, it is still a matter in contest, in debate. The same in the economy. When you look at the faces, it seems to be a fine government. Younger people, professional. The youngest minister is 25. The oldest minister is Mr. Avakov, 55. So it's a very young government, mostly in the age of around 40. Many of them are well known as experts and as distinct from the Ukrainian parliament. The intellectual potential of the government is quite high, but it is still not quite clear as to what they are after. What is the program? On the one hand, we have seen that the government has been a proponent of the libertarianism and a moratorium to sell land. However, on the other hand, we're seeing the restitution of Mr. Azarov's reforms, such as the tax police. We are seeing, or tax militia, as it's called. The chief attorney's or chief prosecutor's office has been restored with the function of checking for the private enterprises. And while Mr. Trump has recently published the talk with Mr. Zelensky, whereby Mr. Zelensky said that the next Attorney General in the Ukraine would be pro-presidential. However, this is just one of the elements of the mosaic. The reforms of the National Security Service has not been done. The Parliament, the Supreme Rada, which, as I said, cannot boast with a very high intellectual level. So the Rada has adopted several decisions, several legislative initiatives on the rental payments for the subsoil, subsurface survey and production. And it appears that many of the extraction companies in the Ukraine would simply have to have this matter. And what we're seeing is Mr. Kolomoisky's oligarchy. And I do not readily believe that Mr. Zelensky would in any way be willing to take on the role of Mr. Kolomoisky's puppet. However, for the moment, we are seeing that he's reaping great benefits from this friendship. So what we would see this libertarian approach. What would happen with the land market? But we have to realize how is this going to happen? Unfortunately, there's a lot of potential for abuse. As to the level of support, popular support for Mr. Zelensky, it is still quite high, even though one has to remember that every Ukrainian president for the past 15 plus years has generally had a honeymoon, which is generally lasted between hour and 18. I'm sorry, a year and 18 months, and then this honeymoon is quickly waning, this graph has been the same for Mr. Yushchenko, Mr. Yanukovych, and Mr. Poroshenko. So it really is the question of what is going to happen to the rating of Mr. Zelensky. And if this new Ukrainian president is going to repeat the mistakes of his predecessors, or else he would really be trying to introduce significant structural changes. Now, we're seeing a great support, as I said, great popular support for Mr. Zelensky and his government. They have a very high credibility with the Ukrainian population, and one may expect that within the next 18 months, this majority, pro-Zelensky majority in the parliament and the government will have the mandate to introduce and to carry out their policies, whatever these policies turn out to be. So in autumn of 2019, we are seeing that the elections in October of 2020 looming. I'm talking about the municipal elections, but apparently that Mr. Zelensky's party will not be able to find enough managers to head the municipalities. The most important thing that one may say that the Ukrainians are hoping for and expecting for today is ending the war in Donbass. And there is a great of terminological confusion and very contested, hot debates about the very term as to how to call it, if it's a war, a strife, a counter-terrorist operation, and apparently ending any war in the position of today does have to have some compromise, and it's not quite possible where to retreat. And the main part of the society is saying that the peace should not be reached at any cost, as they say. One of the most important things which are currently being discussed is the exchange of the POWs. That's right, the prisoners of war and the captives and those who were detained. We have seen one of the first episodes of exchange of persons quite recently, where the media figures that had been in the Russian jails and the Ukrainian sailors were exchanged for a number of Russian nationals. However, we are seeing this process is still developing.
And there are many more Ukrainians remaining in Russian prisons for political reasons. And it's not clear how things would evolve later on, because all for whom the international institutions spoke for, they all were set free. I suppose 122 people are little known beyond Ukraine and Ukraine per se. But in some way it will be linked to further progress of this process. But so far, the process is in the hands of the Russian side, and there's no reason to believe that Russia has changed pursuing its goals that colleague Dobrovolsky has perfectly illustrated after the change in government in Ukraine. So we are all now in expectation. You may have seen that I really blackened things, but no, things are not that negative, but the messages and the signals that the new government has sent us really are quite discouraging. But there's still room and time to change a vector and move towards the European integration, and the new government is supporting this. So in this way, Ukraine remains maybe the most outstanding republic in the post-Soviet space, and we have a lot of interesting things ahead of us.